Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. We're going to be talking about William Blake in this video, more specifically how to answer a section B response for Blake for those of you that are studying political and social protest writing with literature spec B. I'm going to be using a question that came up recently about authority figures. This is it. In Blake's poetry, authority figures are unkind and have no compassion. To what extent do you agree? So this is a typical kind of task you would get for all of the texts for section B, some kind of quotation that you are then agreeing with or disagreeing with at your leisure. Again, it's perfectly acceptable to disagree fully with this, agree fully with this, or do a bit of both. And in today's video, I'm going to be doing a bit of both. I'm going to be using one poem to disagree with this and actually say, I'm going to be using two poems to disagree with this and actually say, I've got two examples of authority figures actually having compassion. And then I'm going to agree with this task using another poem to say, actually, no, sometimes they don't. So I've got 6 poems here, and I wouldn't expect students to be able to talk about 6 poems in an hour for section B. I would expect them maybe to talk about 3 to 5, but 5 at a real maximum. Unusual, but possible maybe. It depends on the length of the poem and the level of detail the student is going into, as well as the speed at which they can write. So I'm going to be talking about 3 poems in today's video in answer to this question. Of course, there are 2 golden rules with English Lit A-level. Answer the question. That's why I've highlighted the key words in this task. And pick the right poems. And that's why I've given you these poems here, all of which might be useful in answering this question because they all have figures in them which could represent authority. So for this video, I'm going to be talking about both Nurse's songs and also The Little Black Boy for reasons that I have bullet pointed here on the right hand side as like a bit of a plan. So I'm going to be using Nurse's song Innocence to disagree, Nurse's song Innocence to agree, and Little Black Boy to disagree. So that's going to be the structure of my response. And I think that's doable for me in an hour because of the amount of discussion I would perhaps want to go into if I was completing this question. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through 3 paragraphs which make up the 3 poems. And as we go through, we'll be discussing what is effective about this essay, this response, and what you should do in your own essay when you sit paper 2 exam with Blake. So to begin with, a tip that I have given in other videos, but I will repeat it here, which is it's far better to go straight into your first poem rather than spending time writing an introduction. Even the examiner has mentioned this, that sometimes students really do spend a long time on the introduction, which doesn't actually say very much at all. So it's far better with this kind of task to go straight into your discussion of your first poem. And here I'm discussing Nurse's song Innocence. The thing to do to make sure that you are answering the task is to keep repeating the focus of the question throughout your answer. So in that case, it's authority figures or the words unkind or compassion. And by doing that, you're showing that you are talking about what you've been asked to talk about. I often use the analogy of an English essay being like driving in a straight line. The most successful drivers are the ones that keep the car driving in a straight line. But as soon as that car begins to veer towards the ditch or the white lines, that's when the car journey and the driver becomes less successful. With an English essay, it's about making sure that you don't go off on a tangent and veer away from the focus of the task. So that's why I need to make sure that I'm talking consistently about authority figures in this answer. So starting off then with Innocence, Nurse's song. Both Nurse's song poems demonstrate that authority figures are not always unkind and act without compassion. In the Innocence version, the children wish to continue playing outside despite the falling darkness. Despite pleading with the children to come home because the sun is gone down, which metaphorically represents the end of their playtime, the children are allowed the opportunity to reply, "No, no, let us play, for it is yet day." The fact that the children are allowed to answer the nurse's command suggests that they are engaging in a democratic dialogue with the authority figure, and stating the best outcome in their best interests. The reaction to the children is also paramount. Rather than dismissing the children's views or forcing them to come indoors, the nurse allows them to continue playing in the last stanza, suggesting that the nurse is a representation of a liberating and kind authority figure who has listened and has resisted any temptation to control the children in a position of power. The triplet of verbs contained within a syndetic list, leaped and shouted and laughed, shows the nurse's kindness has had a positive impact on the children, who are allowed to seek freedom and pleasure in nature. This being an Innocence version, of course, nature is never that far away as a positive utopian theme. So yes, there are techniques here with the language. So triplet of verbs and syndetic list and metaphors. There is that, but remember, this is an open book exam. So we have to ask ourselves, why has the examiner given you the whole text in front of you? And the reason is because they want you to be commenting on authorial methods in perhaps a more liberal way than would have been the case with a closed book exam like paper 1. So they're there in front of you for a reason. It's because you need to refer to them and quote from them in this kind of way. Short, sharp, precise, judiciously selected references to the text always work better, because then you have room to breathe, meaning that you have room to then put in your own interpretations, which is what is going on here. Okay. Let's move on then to the Experience version. However, the Experience version of Nurse's Song is very different, despite presenting the same concept of a caregiver acting at the point at which the children need to come indoors. Unlike the Innocence nurse, the Experience nurse admits to feeling green and pale, which has connotations of sickness and jealousy. In this poem, which is significantly shorter than the former, suggesting a bleaker message is being conveyed, the nurse reports hearing whisperings, suggesting that the children are unable to speak or act freely, and don't have the same enjoyment and careless abandon while playing. Instead, they are made to feel paranoid and silenced. Upon remembering her youth, the nurse suggests that the children come home because the children's spring and day are wasted in play, which conveys the nurse's more cynical view of childhood innocence, essentially suggesting that the children should stop wasting time playing and instead get prepared for the realities of adulthood, where the freedom to play is curtailed or repressed in disguise. Another significant difference between this poem and the Innocence version is the fact that the children are voiceless and not making use of the same democratic discussion with the authority figure. As a result, the nurse here seems cruel and unkind as she prevents them from playing and seeking their utopian sense of freedom. Even though there's no marks available in this specification for comparing and contrasting, sometimes it is useful or unavoidable, as is the case here, because what I'm doing by picking the same poem in both collections is I'm really thinking about how the same idea is treated differently in each version. And that presents that kind of juxtaposition between how Blake depicts these authority figures of the nurses. Okay, so again, that is the second paragraph. Finally, to disagree with this question, because the mother does actually come across as very loving and caring in The Little Black Boy, I've started this paragraph by saying, to disagree with the view that Blake's authority figures are always lacking in compassion, readers can consider The Little Black Boy. Here, Blake foregrounds the harmonious and loving relationship between a black child and his mother, with the middle two stanzas of the poem focusing on the discourse spoken by the mother to her child, an embodiment of racial segregation and discrimination. The poem is clearly political, as it has its roots in the anti-slavery movement that was taking place at the time. Written in pentameter, the mother states that they can bear the beams of love from the sun's rays, representative of God's love, and which can be felt on their skin regardless of its colour. The mother also suggests that their black bodies and sunburnt face is proof that God loves them, specifically the child. This declaration of love and acceptance links to the beginning of the poem, where Blake merges black and white, as if to challenge the superiority acclaimed by white people over their black counterparts. The fact the mother kissed the child and took me on her lap is indicative of a caring authority figure invested in the future of her child and teaching him that, despite his skin colour, clouds of discrimination will disappear in relation to the love that God has for all creatures. Again, it's obvious there, as you can hopefully see, that I'm talking about the mother as a representation of an authority figure, but disagreeing with this task. Clearly, this task is not accurate in this sense, because the mother here is kind and has a lot of compassion for her son. So that is an example there of how to write about the little black boy. And of course, as it's always the case with English, I could write more, of course I could, but this is a timed piece of writing. You're not going to be able to say everything you want to in the time. And I would hope that I would have said enough here to show the examiner that I know Blake, know his poetry, and know how to answer a question about one of the key themes in his collection. Okay, so don't worry if you don't talk about everything. That's a very difficult thing to do and often unrealistic in English. Okay, so that is a example response that came up a few years ago about authority figures having no compassion, using 3 poems to disagree or agree as I see fit. 1 hour task, between 3 to 5 poems is often the standard, in which you're consistently talking about the task set and not veering off on tangents. So that is section B for Blake, for Literature Spec B, Political and Social Protest Writing. Thank you very much for watching, and good luck.